Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into something you probably won't survive, the oddly fascinating world of 18th century hair powder recipes. Picture this, heavy wigs towering like frosted cakes, dusted in chalky white powder that seems to have been made from everything but the kitchen sink. The scent of lavender, orange blossom, or even something faintly like musk wafts gently through grand salons, mingling with whispers of status and scandal. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments, because trust me, wherever you are, this story is guaranteed to put you to sleep. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into a candlelit room in 18th century Europe, the air thick with a scent both sweet and strangely powdery. Around you, the aristocracy fusses over their hair, or rather their wigs, massive, elaborate constructions layered in a fine white dust. This was no mere fashion whim, but a daily ritual, a signal of wealth and refinement that had swept across courts from France to England with relentless popularity. Powdered wigs, or periwigs as they were called, dominated the style scene. You might wonder why anyone would cover their hair with flower-like substances, but back then, it was a full-blown cultural phenomenon. Men, women, and even children took part in this peculiar trend, spending hours dusting their hair or wigs with powders made from starch or ground minerals, often fragranced with floral or musky scents. The resulting cloud of powder was as much a status symbol as a fashion statement, signaling your place in the social pecking order. You probably won't survive this without a few yawns, but consider that powdered wigs were originally practical, helping mask natural body odors and cover hair loss or lice infestations, which were common and persistent nuisances. The powdered surface made it easier to maintain a certain uniformity and cleanliness, though ironically it often attracted more dirt and bugs. Historians still argue whether powdered wigs were a symbol of vanity or social control, a way to distinguish the elite from the common folk, or simply a deeply ingrained habit that spiraled out of control. Some suggest it was a kind of social camouflage, hiding natural hair imperfections beneath a manufactured elegance, while others see it as a sartorial display of power and wealth. The scene now unfolds. Ladies sitting patiently as their hairdressers sift powders through fine sieves. Men puffing clouds of dust into their wigs with soft balls. The whole room bathed in a gentle haze. It was as much a spectacle as it was a routine. The whiteness of the powder was prized. It reflected light, making the hair look fuller and more dramatic under candlelight. And if you're wondering, the process could be maddeningly tedious. Some of these powders had a tendency to cake or clump, turning hair into a crunchy, flaky mess by day's end. Imagine sneezing in a room full of powdered heads, powder clouds erupting like mini snowstorms. So here you are, settled in with your own hair, free from chalk or musk, yet somehow more curious about why, of all things, powdered hair became the peak of style. It was a bizarre mix of practical hygiene, social signaling, and downright fashion obsession, all rolled into one dusty package. You lean in as the story dusts off its early layers and reveals the origins of this curious powdering craze. It's not just an 18th century fad that popped out of nowhere. Rather, it's rooted in centuries of hair and hygiene practices, evolving alongside shifting social norms and strange beauty ideals. Imagine yourself back in the 17th century, where aristocrats, desperate to outshine one another, began experimenting with flour and starch to lighten and whiten their hair. These powders weren't merely for aesthetics. They were statements of status, symbols of privilege signaling that you had the leisure time to maintain such an elaborate look. After all, white powder was not something peasants could afford or bother with. It was too time-consuming and costly. The origins trace back to the French court, where powdered wigs started as a practical solution for rampant lice infestations and patchy hair. You probably didn't want to be known as the itchy noble, so a dusting of starch became a clever cover-up. Over time, this practical application morphed into a full-blown fashion statement. People started adding scents like lavender or orange flower to mask the odor of stale powder and keep their wigs smelling pleasant during long social events. Here's where it gets quirky. Some of these aristocrats reportedly use crushed cuttlefish bones as a base ingredient for their powders. Yes, you heard right. Marine creatures turned into personal grooming products. This marine mineral was prized for its fine, chalky texture, making it ideal for creating that signature white cloud. Oddly enough, people also experimented with starch derived from wheat, rice, and even potatoes, blending these ingredients with perfumes and sometimes a pinch of white lead to enhance whiteness. Of course, today we know lead isn't the safest beauty aid, but back then it was considered perfectly normal. There's also an intriguing fringe tidbit. Some accounts suggest that the powdering ritual included a sprinkle of hair powder onto hats, gloves, and even clothing, extending the dusty aesthetic beyond just wigs. You can almost imagine walking into a room and leaving a faint cloud behind, a signature puff announcing your presence. Historians still argue whether the fashion's popularity was driven primarily by practical concerns or by an obsession with social differentiation. Some believe it was an early form of conspicuous consumption, basically a dusty flex saying, "Look at me, I'm so rich I can afford to be covered in white powder." Others argue it was a communal symbol, a uniform that marked courtly membership, reinforcing social hierarchies through appearance. So as you rest your head, imagine the slow, methodical process. First, carefully preparing the powder mix, sieving it to ensure no clumps, then delicately puffing it over powdered wigs or natural hair. The scent of rose or lavender mingles with the faint grit of starch settling into the fibers. It's a sensory experience that's at once strange, luxurious, and oddly soothing. In the quiet hush of candlelight, the ritual becomes a gentle meditation, a kind of dusty calm before the storm of courtly drama. And as you drift further, you might just appreciate how something as mundane as flower and perfume could become the centerpiece of an entire era's fashion. You sink deeper into the story now, feeling the texture of those curious ingredients that made 18th century hair powders, both fragrant and flaky. The recipes were surprisingly complex, a far cry from just dusting flour on your wig. These mixtures were carefully crafted blends of starches, perfumed oils, and sometimes unexpected additives, each aiming to create that perfect balance between whiteness, scent, and texture. Picture the typical recipe. A base of finely ground starch, usually wheat or rice starch, was sifted until it was as fine as talcum powder. This starch acted as the bulk of the powder, giving it that signature pale color and the ability to cling gently to hair fibers. But powder alone was dull, so perfumers added essential oils, often lavender, orange blossom, or rose to infuse a pleasant aroma. The scents helped mask any unpleasant odors from the hair underneath and the powder itself, which could become a little, well, stale after a day or two. Here's a quirky detail. Some recipes included orris root powder derived from the iris flower's rhizomes. Orris root not only smelled sweet but also acted as a natural fixative, helping the scent last longer on hair. It was like an early version of modern perfume, layering but in powdered form. Sometimes even ambergris, a waxy, rare substance from sperm whales, was added to give an exotic muskiness, though that was reserved for the wealthiest of powder users. In more experimental circles, people threw in white lead or Venetian ceruse to enhance whiteness and smoothness. Now, this sounds alarming today because of lead's toxicity, but back then, it was a fashionable cosmetic ingredient believed to brighten and soften skin and hair. The irony is thick. You could be both fashionably powdered and slowly poisoned by your beauty regimen. Another odd tidbit is that some hair powders included crushed pearls or mica to add a subtle shimmer, giving wigs a delicate sparkle under candlelight. It was the 18th century equivalent of glitter, minus the modern environmental concerns. The preparation was a science and an art. Some recipes required steeping ingredients in alcohol or vinegar before drying and grinding, extracting the fragrances and ensuring a fine texture. Others emphasized the importance of drying powder slowly to avoid clumping and maintaining a powder so fine it could drift lightly over hair without weighing it down. Historians still argue whether the complexity of these recipes was driven more by the desire for novelty or by actual improvements in cosmetic performance. Was the mixing of exotic ingredients a status game? showing off how many rare items you could afford to dust on your head, or a genuine pursuit of beauty innovation. Imagine now the scene in an 18th century apothecary or perfumer's shop, where powders were custom made and sold in small, delicate boxes or tins. You could have your own special blend, designed to suit your taste and social rank. The sensory experience here was as much about the powder's scent as its look and feel, an invisible aura announcing your presence before you even entered a room. So as your eyelids grow heavier, picture the soft dusting of this finely milled powder, the faint floral notes drifting gently, mixing with the flicker of candlelight. It's a ritual both strange and comforting, a snapshot of a world where beauty meant more than just appearance. It was about the entire atmosphere you created.